The shuttle descended through the pale pink clouds of Villa Prime's largest moon. And Lieutenant Maya Chun pressed her face against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. She had spent 3 months in cryosleep to reach this place. And now the famous Galactic Integration Academy spread beneath her like a dream made real silver spires reaching toward the sky. Domed gardens glowing with bioluminescent plants. And thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds walking the crystal pathways below. First time seeing it in person? Asked the shuttle pilot, a four-armed creature with skin like polished bronze. Maya nodded without looking away from the window. And her heart beat faster with excitement and nervousness mixed together. It is beautiful, she said quietly. The pilot made a sound that might have been a laugh. And his upper arms adjusted the controls while his lower arms gestured toward the academy. Beautiful and terrifying for most newcomers, he said. But you humans seem to handle new things well enough. Or so I have heard. Maya finally turned to look at him, and she smiled in that calm way she had. Practice for months before leaving Earth. We try our best, she answered. The shuttle landed on a platform made of something that looked like glass but felt solid as stone beneath her boots. And Maya stepped out into air that smelled faintly of flowers she could not name. The gravity here was lighter than Earth by almost half, and she had to focus on each step to keep from bouncing like an excited rabbit. A crowd had gathered near the landing zone, and Maya realized with a jolt of surprise that they were waiting for her. She recognized some species from her training materials. The tall feathered Aetheri with their golden plumage and sharp, intelligent eyes. The crystalline Velcath, who seemed to be made of living gemstones. The aquatic Mirans floating in hover tanks filled with pale blue water. But seeing them in holographic images was nothing compared to meeting them in real life. And Maya felt very small and very human as she walked toward the welcome committee. A young Aetheri stepped forward, her feathers shimmering between gold and copper in the alien sunlight. And she raised one wing arm in what Maya recognized as a formal greeting. Welcome to the Galactic Integration Academy, the Aetheri said, and her voice sounded like music mixed with birdsong. I am Kiravel, and I have been assigned as your orientation partner for the first semester. Maya returned the gesture as best she could with her wingless human arms, and she hoped she did not look too foolish. Thank you for the welcome, Maya said. I am Lieutenant Maya Chun of Earth, and I am honored to be here. A ripple of whispers moved through the gathered crowd, and Maya caught fragments of conversation in languages. Her translator struggled to process. So small, someone said. Look at those strange flat eyes, another voice added. Is it true they come from an unclassified world? Kiravel's feathers ruffled slightly, and Maya understood that the Aetheri was uncomfortable with the attention as well. Perhaps we should begin the tour, Kiravel suggested quickly. There is much to see, and your orientation schedule is quite full, Maya nodded gratefully. And she followed Kiravel away from the crowd with relief flooding through her chest. The academy was even more impressive up close, and Kiravel explained each building they passed with obvious pride in her voice. The Silver Tower is the Hall of Sciences, she said, gesturing with one elegant wing. And the dome beside it contains the Diplomatic Training Center, where you will learn to negotiate with over 300 known species. Maya listened carefully and tried to memorize every detail. But part of her mind kept drifting to the strange looks she received from every being they passed. She was used to being watched. Humans were new to the galactic community, and Earth had only made first contact 5 years ago. But something in these stares felt different. It was not just curiosity she saw in those alien eyes. It was something closer to unease Kiravel. Maya said carefully as they walked through a garden filled with plants that glowed softly in shades of blue and purple. May I ask you something? The Aetheri's feathers shifted to a warmer shade of gold, which Maya's training told her indicated openness and willingness to talk. Of course, Kiravel replied. That is why I am here. Why does everyone seem nervous around me? Maya asked. I have tried to be polite and follow all the cultural protocols I learned, but I feel like I am making everyone uncomfortable just by existing. Kiravel was quiet for a long moment, and her feathers slowly changed to a deeper bronze color that Maya did not recognize from her studies. I will be honest with you, Kiravel finally said, because I believe honesty is the foundation of good relations between species. She paused near a bench made of something that looked like frozen light, and she settled onto it with her wings folded carefully against her back. Your world has not been fully classified yet, Kiravel explained. The survey teams that visited Earth sent back reports that were considered incomplete or possibly exaggerated, and the Admissions Council debated for nearly a full cycle before approving your application. Maya sat down beside her, and she felt the strange bench material adjust to support her weight perfectly. Exaggerated how? She asked. Kiravel's feathers rippled with what Maya was beginning to recognize as discomfort. The initial surveys suggested that Earth might be classified as a death world, the Ethery said quietly. But that seemed impossible because no sapient species has ever evolved on a confirmed death world. And certainly no death world species has ever achieved space travel. Maya frowned slightly, and she searched her memory for any mention of this term in her training. What exactly is a death world? She asked. Kiravel made a soft sound that might have been a nervous laugh. It is a planet so hostile to life that survival should be impossible, she explained. Extreme gravity, violent weather patterns, dangerous predators, toxic environments, the kind of world that exists only in horror stories and theoretical models. She looked at Maya with something almost like pity in her golden eyes. The survey teams must have made mistakes in their readings, Kiravel said, because you seem perfectly normal and healthy, and your species clearly developed advanced civilization. So Earth cannot possibly be what those reports suggested. Maya opened her mouth to respond, but a soft chime from Kiravel's communication device interrupted her. Your first class begins in 1 hour, Kiravel said, checking the device. Xenobiology 401 with Professor Vrethsulen in the Hall of Sciences. She handed Maya a small tablet that displayed her schedule, and Maya noticed one class highlighted in red: planetary classification and survival indices. Maya read aloud. That sounds interesting. Kiravel's feathers shifted to an odd grayish color. Professor Vrethsulen is 400 years old and has taught that course for most of his life, she said. He knows more about planetary classification than anyone in the known galaxy. She stood and gestured for Maya to follow her toward the Silver Tower. I am sure he will clear up any confusion about Earth's classification, Kiravel added, and then everyone will stop being so nervous around you. Maya followed her orientation partner through the beautiful alien campus, and she wondered why Kiravel's words sounded more like a hope than a certainty. She thought about the world she had left behind, the blue oceans and green forests, the mountains that touched the clouds and the storms that shook the sky. It was home, and it was the only world she had ever known. How dangerous could it really be? The Hall of Sciences rose before them like a monument to knowledge itself, and Maya took a deep breath of the flower-scented alien air. Whatever answers waited inside, she was ready to learn the truth about her strange little planet on the edge of known space. She just hoped the truth would not be too surprising. The lecture hall was enormous, and Maya felt like she had stepped inside a living jewel. The walls curved upward in flowing organic shapes that glowed with soft internal light, and hundreds of seats arranged in rising tiers held students from dozens of different species. Maya found a seat near the middle of the hall, and she noticed how the students around her shifted slightly away when she sat down. She tried not to let it bother her. At the front of the hall stood a platform made of something that looked like solidified starlight. And upon it waited the most extraordinary being Maya had ever seen. Professor Rethsalon was a Velcath, and his body appeared to be made entirely of living crystal, deep purple at his core, fading to pale violet at his edges. With veins of silver light pulsing slowly through his translucent form, he had no face that Maya could recognize, but clusters of luminous points near his upper section served as photoreceptors, and they swept across the assembled students with ancient patience. "Welcome to Xenobiology 401, the professor said, and his voice resonated through the hall like wind chimes made of glass. "Today, we begin our study of planetary classification and survival indices." A murmur of excitement rippled through the students, and Maya noticed Kiravel settling into a seat 3 rows below her. "For centuries," Professor Rethsalon continued, "we have categorized worlds according to their habitability ratings. And at the bottom of every classification system sits a category that most scientists consider purely theoretical." He raised one crystalline limb, and a holographic display flickered to life above the platform. The image showed a planet wreathed in storms and fire, its surface cracked with glowing volcanic wounds. "Deathworlds," the professor said, and a hush fell over the lecture hall. "Planets so hostile that sapient life should never evolve there." He began to pace slowly across the platform, and his crystal body caught the light in mesmerizing patterns. "These are the worlds of nightmare and legend," he continued. "The places where every environmental factor seems designed to destroy organic life. And yet, through some cruel joke of evolution, life somehow finds a way to survive." Maya leaned forward in her seat, and she felt a strange tightness forming in her chest. "Until recently," Professor Rethsalon said, and his photoreceptors flickered briefly toward Maya's section of the hall, "we believed that no sapient species could possibly originate from such a world." He paused, and the silence stretched like a held breath. "Let us examine the traits that define a death world," he said, "and perhaps you will understand why contact with such a species was considered impossible." The holographic display changed to show a cross-section of a planet with its crust marked in angry, red lines. "Trait 1, tectonic instability," the professor announced. "Deathworlds experience constant geological violence where the very ground shifts and breaks without warning." He gestured at the display, and images appeared of mountains exploding with molten rock and cities crumbling as the earth split beneath them. "The crust of such a world is never still," he explained. "Mountains erupt with liquid fire, oceans of magma lurk beneath thin stone shells, and entire regions can be swallowed by the planet itself." Maya's hand rose calmly into the air. Professor Rethsalon's photoreceptors focused on her with obvious surprise, and the other students turned to stare. "Yes?" the professor asked. "You have a question already?" Maya lowered her hand and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "On Earth we call those earthquakes and volcanoes," she said. "And while they can be dangerous, we have built cities near active volcanic zones for thousands of years because the soil there is excellent for farming." The lecture hall went completely silent. A Mirran student in the front row bubbled nervously in their tank, and several Ithori students' feathers shifted to alarmed gray colors. Professor Rethsalon's crystal body flickered with rapid pulses of light that Maya could not interpret. "I see," he said slowly. "You are the human student, are you not?" Maya nodded. "And you are saying that your species willingly lives near active geological instabilities?" he asked. "Some of our most famous cities are built on fault lines," Maya confirmed. "And one of our most beloved regions is essentially a giant volcanic hotspot where the ground can erupt with boiling water at any moment." She thought of Yellowstone and the Vay. Tourists who flock there every year. "We consider it quite beautiful," she added. The professor was silent for a long moment before continuing. "Let us proceed to trait 2, he said, and his voice seemed slightly less certain than before. "Extreme atmospheric variation." The holographic display changed to show massive spiral storms covering half a planet and funnel clouds tearing across flat landscapes. Deathworlds experience violent atmospheric events. Professor Vrethsalin explained. Massive pressure differentials create destructive wind phenomena capable of leveling cities and stripping the ground bare. Maya's hand rose again. The students around her physically flinched. We call those hurricanes and tornadoes. Maya said calmly, they happen regularly on Earth, and we have developed sophisticated tracking systems to predict their paths. She paused and considered whether to add the next part. Some humans chase tornadoes recreationally, she said. They drive vehicles into the storm paths to observe them up close. A sound like shattering glass came from somewhere in the hall, and Maya realized it was a Valkath student expressing shock. For observation purposes? Professor Vrethsalin asked weakly. Partly, Maya said, but mostly because they find it exciting. The professor's crystalline form dimmed noticeably, and he took a moment to gather himself before continuing. Trait 3, he said. And this is perhaps the most disturbing characteristic of theoretical deathworlds. The display changed to show liquid falling from clouds and vast expanses of what looked like moving blue surfaces, dihydrogen monoxide cycles. The professor announced gravely, on Deathworlds, this extremely reactive compound falls freely from the sky in liquid form, pools in massive quantities on the surface, and sometimes even solidifies into razor-sharp crystals that fall from the atmosphere. Maya did not even raise her hand this time. That is rain and snow, she said. And those blue surfaces are oceans, which cover about 70% of Earth's surface. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Our bodies are approximately 60% water, she added. We need to consume it regularly to survive, and we often immerse ourselves in it recreationally. Caravel made a sound that was half gasp and half chirp, and her feathers went completely white. You swim in dihydrogen monoxide? Someone asked from across the hall. We teach our children to swim almost as soon as they can walk, Maya said. It is considered an important survival skill. Survival skill, the professor repeated faintly. Yes, I suppose it would be. He stood motionless for several seconds, and Maya wondered if Velkath could experience something like shock. The other students were staring at her, now with expressions that ranged from disbelief to something that looked very much like fear. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had only been answering questions honestly. Was that wrong? Professor Vrethsalin finally stirred, and when he spoke again, his voice had taken on a strange hollow quality. I believe we should take a brief recess, he said. Please return in 10 minutes, and we will continue with the remaining classification traits. The students began to rise, and Maya noticed that they gave her a very wide berth as they filed toward the exits. Caravel flew up to Maya's row, and her feathers were slowly returning to their normal golden color. Maya, she said quietly, I think I am beginning to understand why the admissions council was so uncertain about Earth's classification. Maya looked at her orientation partner with genuine confusion. I do not understand, she said. Everything I described is completely normal where I come from. Caravel's feathers rippled with an emotion Maya could not identify. I think that might be exactly the problem, the Aethery said softly through the curved windows of the lecture hall. Maya could see the peaceful gardens of the academy and the gentle pink sky of Velar Prime's moon. It all looked so fragile somehow. She thought about the world she had left behind, the hurricanes and earthquakes, the vast churning oceans and the mountains that breathed fire. She had never thought of Earth as dangerous. It was just home. But looking at the terrified faces of her fellow students, Maya was beginning to wonder if home meant something very different to humans than it did to everyone else in the galaxy. The recess ended far too quickly for the other students, but Maya returned to her seat and waited patiently for the lecture to continue. She noticed that the seats directly around her had emptied, and a ring of vacant space now separated her from her classmates. Professor Vrethsalin flickered back to full brightness on his platform. And when he spoke again, his voice carried a strange mixture of academic determination and barely concealed dread. "Let us continue," he said, "with Trait 4 predatory ecosystems." The holographic display shifted to show a collection of creatures that made Maya's heart ache with unexpected homesickness. She recognized stylized versions of lions and sharks and wolves, rendered in cold scientific detail. Deathworlds theoretically produce apex predators, the professor explained. Species that have evolved with the singular purpose of hunting, killing, and consuming other life forms. He highlighted several of the creatures with his crystalline limbs. These organisms develop natural weapons, sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh, claws capable of ripping through hide and bone, powerful muscles built for explosive violence. Maya's hand rose into the air with the same calm motion as before. Several students actually stood up and moved to seats farther away. "Yes," Professor Vrethsalin said, and his voice sounded almost resigned now. "Please tell us about Earth's predators." Maya nodded and thought carefully about how to explain. "Earth has thousands of apex predator species," she said. "In the water we have sharks that can grow to 8 meters long and sense blood from kilometers away. And we have orcas that hunt in coordinated packs with intelligence that rivals our own," she continued without pausing. "On land we have bears that stand 3 meters tall and can crush bone with a single blow. And we have big cats like lions and tigers that can bring down prey many times their own size. And we have wolves that hunt in organized groups with complex social structures." A curious student in the corner began clicking in rapid distress, and Maya watched her gather her belongings and scurry toward the exit. "We also have venomous creatures," Maya added. "Snakes whose bite can kill in minutes, spiders whose venom dissolves flesh, jellyfish whose tentacles deliver agony that can last for days." She paused and smiled slightly at a memory. "We keep some of them as pets," she said. "The less dangerous ones anyway." "Pets," the professor repeated flatly. "You voluntarily share living space with predatory species. Dogs are descended from wolves," Maya explained. "And cats are basically small ambush predators that we invite into our homes because we find them cute and enjoy their company." The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. Professor Vrethsalin's crystalline form flickered with colors Maya had never seen before, and she wondered if she was witnessing the Velkath equivalent of a breakdown. "Let us move on," the professor said finally. To Trait 5 microbial hostility, the display changed to show magnified images of bacteria and viruses, rendered in disturbing detail. "Perhaps the most insidious characteristic of Deathworlds," Professor Vrethsalin said, "is the presence of microscopic organisms that invade other beings and destroy them from within." He gestured at the swirling images of tiny predators. "These microorganisms are invisible to the naked eye, impossible to detect without advanced equipment, and capable of spreading through entire populations with terrifying speed." Maya did not even wait for the professor to finish before speaking. "Bacteria and viruses," she said, "and also parasites that can live inside host bodies for years." She thought about her immunization records and all the tiny battles her body had fought. "Since birth, Earth has experienced multiple pandemics throughout our history," she continued. "Diseases that killed significant portions of our global population. And we survived them through a combination of our immune systems adapting and our development of medical treatments." Kiravel raised a trembling wing from her seat below. "What do you mean by significant portions?" the Aethery asked in a small voice. Maya considered the question. "Our deadliest plague killed approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of an entire continent's population," she said. "And that was before we had modern medicine." The lecture hall erupted into chaos. Students were speaking over each other in dozens of languages. And Maya's translator struggled to keep up with the flood of terrified exclamations. Impossible! Someone shouted. How are any of them still alive? Another voice demanded. They should have gone extinct thousands of times over. A Velcast student wailed in tones of shattering crystal. Professor Vrethsalin raised his limbs and called for silence. And slowly the chaos subsided into tense whispers. There is one more trait, the professor said. And his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. One that I had considered purely theoretical until today. He paused. And his photoreceptors fixed directly on Maya Trait 6, he said. Persistence hunting evolution. The display changed to show a simple animation, a four-legged creature running across a plain, followed by a two-legged figure that moved much more slowly. Our models suggest, Professor Vrethsalin said carefully, that a Deathworld might produce a very specific type of predator, one that does not rely on speed or strength or natural weapons. He pointed at the two-legged figure in the animation. This theoretical predator would hunt through endurance. He explained, it would identify prey, begin pursuit, and simply never stop following, never stop tracking, never stop coming. The animation showed the four-legged creature running ahead, resting, running again, and the two-legged figure just kept walking. Never stopping, never resting, always following. The prey would run and exhaust itself, the professor said. And the predator would simply walk until its target could not run anymore. Every eye in the lecture hall turned to Maya. She sat very still in her seat. And she realized that her classmates were looking at her the same way prey animals looked at wolves. That is us, Maya said quietly. That is how our ancestors hunted before we developed tools. The sound that escaped from Kiravel was something between a cry and a song of mourning. We would track an animal across open ground for hours or even days. Maya explained, our bodies are designed for long-distance travel in ways that most Earth species cannot match. We sweat to cool ourselves. We walk upright to minimize sun exposure. And we have endurance that lets us outlast almost any other creature on our planet. She looked at the animated figure on the display. Still walking, still following. The prey would run until its body overheated and its muscles failed, she said. And we would just keep walking until we caught up. The Kirik student who had left earlier peeked back into the lecture hall, saw Maya still talking, and disappeared again with a terrified, clicking sound. Professor Vrethsalin stood motionless on his platform, and his crystal body had gone almost completely dark, except for slow pulses of deep purple light. We used to call it persistence hunting, Maya said, and some human cultures still practice it today. She looked around at the empty seats surrounding her and the terrified faces beyond them. I'm sorry if this is disturbing, she said sincerely. These things have always seemed normal to me, and I never realized how they might sound to someone who did not grow up with them. Professor Vrethsalin finally stirred, and when he spoke his voice was barely audible. I have taught this course for 400 years, he said, and I have described Deathworlds as theoretical extremes, places that might exist somewhere in the vast universe, but surely could never produce intelligent life. His photoreceptors fixed on Maya with something like awe. And now a young woman from such a world sits in my lecture hall and apologizes for making her classmates uncomfortable. He made a sound that Maya's translator rendered as bitter laughter. I need to contact the classification board, he said. Class is dismissed for today. The students fled, and Maya remained in her seat watching them go. Kiravel was the last to leave, and she paused at the door to look back at her orientation partner. Maya, she said softly, what else have you not told us about your world? Maya thought about the lightning that split the sky and the earthquakes that shook cities, and the flu seasons that swept through populations every year. She thought about the wars and the famines and the countless ways humans had found to survive despite everything their planet threw at them. Honestly, she said, I'm not sure where to begin. Kiravel's feathers shifted through a dozen colors Maya could not name. And then the Ithori turned and flew away without another word. Maya sat alone in the empty lecture hall, surrounded by vacant seats and a lingering fear of beings who had just learned that monsters were real, and the monsters looked like her. Maya expected to eat dinner alone that night, so she was surprised when she arrived at the dining hall and found a crowd waiting for her. They kept their distance at first, a nervous circle of feathers and crystals and chitinous shells, but their eyes followed her every movement as she selected food from the synthesizer and found an empty table. She had barely taken her first bite when a young Velcath approached her table with slow, cautious steps. "May I ask you something?" the student asked, and her voice chimed like distant bells. Maya gestured to the seat across from her. "Of course," she said. The Velcath sat, and Maya noticed that her crystalline body was trembling slightly with soft musical vibrations. "How do you sleep?" the student asked. Maya blinked in confusion. "I close my eyes and lose consciousness for several hours," she said. "The same as most species, I think." The Velcath made a sound of frustration. "No. I mean, how do you sleep knowing that predators exist on your world?" She clarified. "How do you close your eyes and make yourself vulnerable when there are creatures that hunt in darkness?" Maya considered the question seriously, and she realized it deserved a thoughtful answer. "We evolved alongside those predators," she explained. "And our ancestors learned to build shelters and make fires and watch over each other while some of us slept." She took another bite of her food before continuing. "Fear never went away," she admitted. "We still feel it, that jolt of panic when we hear a strange noise at night, that instinct to freeze when something moves in the shadows." The Velcath leaned closer, her photoreceptors bright with fascination. "Then how do you function?" she asked. "We learned to act despite the fear," Maya said simply. "Not to ignore it, but to feel it and do what needed to be done anyway." More students had drifted closer now, forming a loose semicircle around Maya's table. A Mirren floated forward in their tank, and their translated voice bubbled through the water. "Is it true that your planet's star emits harmful radiation directly onto your surface?" they asked. "Ultraviolet light," Maya confirmed. "It can damage our skin and eyes with prolonged exposure. It increases our risk of certain diseases." "And you go outside anyway?" the Mirren asked incredulously. "We develop protective clothing and chemical compounds to shield our skin," Maya said. "And we wear dark lenses over our eyes on bright days." She smiled at the memory of summer beaches and sunny afternoons. "Many humans actually enjoy being in the sunlight," she added. "We find it pleasant and energizing despite the risks." The crowd around her table had grown, and Maya found herself answering questions for over an hour. Yes, humans ate the flesh of other creatures and found it delicious. Yes, humans voluntarily climbed mountains where the air was too thin to breathe properly. Yes, humans explored the deepest parts of their oceans where the pressure could crush metal. Yes, humans built homes in deserts where temperatures could kill in hours, and in frozen regions where exposed skin would die from cold. Each answer brought new expressions of horror and fascination. And Maya began to understand something important. These beings were not looking at her with hatred or disgust. They were looking at her with awe. "How are you still so calm?" Kiravel asked from somewhere in the crowd. And Maya turned to find her orientation partner watching her with feathers that shifted between gold and silver. "You just learned that your homeworld is classified as a nightmare planet," Kiravel continued. "And you sit here eating dinner and answering questions like nothing has changed." Maya set down her eating utensil and thought about the question. "Because nothing has changed," she said finally. "Earth is the same world it was before I came here. The same oceans and storms and predators and diseases." She looked around at the gathered students. The only thing that changed is my understanding of how other species see it. She continued. And that does not make me love my home any less. She stood. And the crowd shifted back nervously before stopping themselves. Earth made us what we are, Maya said. Stubborn and adaptable and too determined to know when we should give up. She smiled. And there was genuine warmth in her expression. We are not monsters, she said. We are survivors, and I think survival is something worth being proud of. The moment stretched, and Maya felt something shift in the room, attention releasing. Fear transforming slowly into something else. Then the alarms began to scream. Red light flooded the dining hall. And a synthesized voice blared from every speaker in the building. Emergency containment breach in Biological Research Wing 7. The voice announced. Class 7 pathogen release detect. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Chaos erupted as students fled in every direction. And Maya grabbed Kiravel before the ethery could be swept away in the crowd. What is a Class 7 pathogen? Maya demanded. Kiravel's feathers had gone stark white with terror. A bacterial strain we were studying from a dead world. She gasped. It is lethal to most galactic species within hours of exposure. There is no treatment. No cure. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. But it was not fear. It was determination. Where's the medical wing? She asked. Kiravel stared at her in disbelief. You cannot go there, she said. The contaminated area will be sealed, and anyone inside will be left to die. It is the only way to stop the spread. Where is the medical wing? Maya repeated more firmly. Something in her voice made Kiravel's feathers flatten against her body. East corridor. 3rd level, the ethery whispered. But Maya, you will die if you go in there. Maya was already moving toward the exit. And she called back over her shoulder. Maybe, she said. Or maybe not. My immune system has fought worse. She ran through corridors filled with panicking students and staff. And she followed the emergency signs toward the research wing. The closer she got, the more empty the hallways became. When she reached the sealed doors of Wing 7, she found a group of medical staff in protective suits, arguing frantically with each other. We have 12 people still inside, one of them was saying. The contamination is spreading faster than the models predicted. We cannot send anyone in without proper protection, another replied. And the protective suits take hours to prepare. Maya stepped forward. And the medical staff turned to look at her with confusion. I'm from Earth, she said simply. Let me in. That is insane, someone said. You will be exposed to a pathogen that kills within hours. Maya met their eyes calmly. Your bacteria evolved on a world with gentle conditions and weak competition, she explained. My immune system evolved on a death world where microscopic organisms have been trying to kill me since before I was born. She gestured at the sealed doors. Your pathogen will not know what to do with a human body, she said. Our defenses are like nothing it has ever encountered. The medical staff exchanged uncertain looks. There is no data to support that theory. Someone protested weakly. Then let me be your data, Maya replied. Because right now I am the only option you have. A long, terrible moment passed. And then the lead medical officer stepped forward and opened the sealed doors. Maya walked through without hesitation. The air inside smelled wrong, sharp, and chemical, and dangerous, but Maya kept moving. She found the first victim collapsed in a laboratory. An elderly Velcath whose crystal body had gone cloudy and dark. She lifted them carefully and carried them toward the decontamination zone. Then she went back for the next one and the next one. She worked for hours in the contaminated wing. And her body did exactly what she had promised it would. It fought the alien bacteria with millions of years of evolutionary experience. And it won. By the time the last survivor was evacuated, Maya was exhausted and covered in substances she preferred not to think about, but she was alive. And so were the 12 people she had carried out of the darkness. She emerged from decontamination to find half the academy waiting for her. And the expressions on their alien faces had changed. Completely, they were not looking at her with fear anymore. They were looking at her with hope. Caravel pushed through the crowd and wrapped her wings around Maya in something that felt very much like a hug. "You impossible, wonderful, terrifying creature," the Ethori whispered. "How did you know you would survive?" Maya returned the embrace and let herself feel the exhaustion she had been holding back. "I did not know," she admitted quietly. "But those people needed help, and I was the only one who might be able to give it." She pulled back and looked at her friend. "That is what we do," she said. "That is what Earth taught us. When there is a chance to save someone, you take it, even if the odds are against you." She smiled tiredly. "Especially if the odds are against you." 3 days after the containment breach, Maya sat in the Academy's medical bay, watching the last of her rescued patients wake up, the elderly Velkath. She had carried out first a professor named Thelverin who had been studying the pathogen. When the breach occurred, blinked their photoreceptors slowly and focused on Maya's face. "You are the human," Thelverin said, and their voice was weak but filled with wonder. "I am," Maya confirmed. "How are you feeling?" The ancient Velkath made a sound like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze. "I should be dead," they said. "I remember the contamination alarms, and I remember falling. And then I remember waking up here." Their photoreceptors brightened with curiosity. "The medical staff tell me you carried me out of the sealed zone with your bare hands," Thelverin continued. "They tell me you walked through a Class 7 pathogen environment for 6 hours and emerged without any symptoms." Maya shrugged modestly. "My immune system is apparently very good at its job," she said. Thelverin made that chiming sound again, and Maya realized it was laughter. "Your immune system evolved to fight microscopic warfare on a daily basis," the Velkath said. "Our little laboratory bacteria never stood a chance." A knock at the medical bay door interrupted them, and Caravel entered with her feathers glowing a warm golden color that Maya had learned meant happiness and affection. "The Galactic Council representative has arrived," Caravel announced. "And Professor Vrethsalin has requested that you attend a special assembly in the main hall." Maya stood and smoothed down her academy uniform. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Caravel's feathers rippled with amusement. "I do not think trouble is the right word," she said mysteriously. The main assembly hall was filled to capacity when Maya arrived, and every seat held a being who turned to watch her enter. She recognized students from her classes, staff members she had passed in hallways, and dozens of faces she had never seen before. At the front of the hall stood Professor Vrethsalin, his crystalline body glowing brighter than Maya had ever seen it. Beside him floated a holographic figure that Maya recognized from her diplomatic training, a representative of the Galactic Council itself. The crowd parted as Maya walked toward the front, and she heard whispers following. "In her wake, that is her," someone murmured. "The human from the Deathworld," another voice added. "She saved 12 lives," a third said with something like reverence. Maya reached the front of the hall and stood before the professor and the council representative. Feeling smaller than ever under so many watching eyes, Professor Vrethsalin spoke first, and his voice resonated through the silent hall. 4 days ago," he said, "I stood in this academy and taught my students that Deathworlds were theoretical nightmares, places too hostile to produce intelligent life." His photoreceptors fixed on Maya. "I was wrong," he continued, "and I have rarely been so grateful to be wrong about something." The holographic council representative drifted forward, and their form shimmered with official colors. "Lieutenant Maya Chen," the representative said. On behalf of the Unified Systems Galactic Council, I am here to formally update your homeworld's classification. A holographic display appeared above the assembly, showing Earth in all its blue and green beauty. Earth, third planet of the Sol system, has been confirmed as a Class 12 Deathworld, the representative announced. The highest classification ever assigned to a world with sapient inhabitants. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But the representative was not finished. However, they continued. We are also adding a special notation to Earth's File 1 that has never been used before in galactic records. The display shifted to show official documentation, and Maya read the words that appeared: Native Sapient Species, Humanity. The representative read aloud. Threat assessment, minimal. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. Despite originating from one of the most hostile environments ever recorded, the representative continued. Humans have demonstrated remarkable compassion, cooperation, and willingness to protect other species. Even at great personal risk, they turned to face the assembled crowd. The Council recommends full integration of humanity into galactic society and continued observation of this extraordinary species. The representative paused, and their form flickered with what Maya thought might be amusement. Additional note. They read from the documentation. Do not underestimate them, and do not threaten what they protect. The assembly hall erupted into sound clicking and chirping and chiming and bubbling as hundreds of beings expressed their approval in their own ways. Maya stood at the center of it all, and she felt tears pricking at her eyes for the first time since leaving Earth. Kiravel appeared at her side and pressed something into her hand, a small, crystalline token that glowed with soft inner light. It is the Academy's highest honor, Kiravel explained, given to those who demonstrate exceptional courage in service of others. Maya looked down at the beautiful object, and she thought about everything that had led to this moment. She thought about the lectures on Deathworld traits and the terrified faces of her classmates. She thought about the questions in the dining hall and the sealed doors of Wing 7. She thought about the 12 people she had carried out of darkness and the ancient Velkath who had called her impossible and wonderful. Thank you, she said, and her voice was steady despite the emotions swelling in her chest. Professor Vrethsalon approached her after the crowd had begun to disperse, and his crystalline form pulsed with colors Maya had learned to recognize as deep respect. I owe you an apology, the professor said. When you first arrived, I looked at you and saw only the horror of your homeworld. He made a sound like distant thunder. I did not see the person standing before me. He continued. A young woman who faced that horror every day of her life and emerged, not as a monster, but as someone capable of extraordinary kindness. Maya shook her head. You do not need to apologize, she said. You are not wrong about Earth. It is dangerous and violent and full of things that want to kill us. She smiled. And it was the same calm smile she had worn since her first day at the academy. But it is also beautiful, she said. And it taught us that survival means nothing if we do not protect each other along the way. Professor Vrethsalon's body chimed softly. I have lived for 400 years, he said, and I have never learned anything as valuable as what you taught me in 4 days. He turned and drifted away, leaving Maya alone with Kiravel in the emptying hall. The Aethery's feathers had settled into a soft golden glow, and she looked at her human friend with eyes full of warmth. What will you do now? Kiravel asked. Maya looked out the great windows at the pink sky of Vela Prime's moon, and she thought about the stars waiting beyond it. I will finish my training, she said, and then I will go wherever I am needed most. She turned to smile at her friend. Earth taught me to survive, she said, but this academy has taught me that survival is just the beginning. She walked toward the exit, and Kiravel fell into step beside her. There is a whole galaxy out there, Maya said. full of beings who need to learn that humans are not the monsters from their stories. She paused at the doorway and looked back at the empty hall where everything had changed. "We are something better," she said. "We are the survivors who learned to care about something beyond ourselves." That night, Maya returned to her quarters and found a message waiting on her personal terminal. It was from the Galactic Council, and it contained her updated classification file, the official record of who and what she was. She read it slowly, and when she reached the final notation, she laughed quietly to herself. "Do not underestimate them, and do not threaten what they protect." She closed the file and walked to her window, where the stars stretched out like an infinite sea of possibility. Somewhere among those stars was Earth, small and blue and dangerous and beautiful. Home. Maya smiled and let herself feel proud of the world that had made her. Then she went to sleep, because tomorrow her training would continue, and there was still so much work to do. The galaxy was vast and strange and full of wonders, and humanity had only just begun to show it what a Deathworld species could become. Not monsters, not nightmares, just people who had learned to face the impossible and refused to stop walking until they reached the other side. And that, Maya thought as sleep took her, was the most human thing of all.